Alright, we're going to start by taking the distributor cap and the wires off. There's just two 8mm bolts holding the cap on. On this one you can actually use a Phillips screwdriver as well. I'm going to take the wiring loom out of this plastic clip here. Try to pop it up, but if that doesn't work you can just open the clip itself. That's what I'm going to do here. Pop this one side up and it'll open right up. Then there's a couple ground wires I'm going to take off. Just two 10mm bolts here. Then rather than taking the wires out of the clips themselves, I'm going to take the whole bracket off. That way when we reassemble it, all your wires are still in the right order and you don't have to reroute all the ignition wires. Same thing with the throttle cable. I'm going to take the brackets right off rather than taking them out of the clips. It's just a little faster and easier that way when it all goes back together. You don't have to. Now if your ignition wires are old on your vehicle, you probably want to consider doing the plugs and wires at the same time, because a lot of the time these boots will get brittle. When we're trying to take them off, they're going to break. On this one, fortunately, the wires are relatively new, so they came out pretty easy. Take off the throttle cable, two 10mm bolts to remove the throttle cable bracket, and then you just pull the throttle back and these things just pop right out relatively easily. I'm going to take all this stuff and kind of set it off to the side. I can take my whole ignition wire set and cap all in one piece and just set it aside. These are just vapor hoses. These can come off relatively hard sometimes. If you got a picker or something, sometimes you can stick a pickup underneath there and spray a little WD-40, and that will kind of ease the process of getting these things off. Once you get this air intake boot off, you probably just going to want to check it for cracks or anything like that. Those get old and brittle as well. The clamps on this are just 8mm bolts or a flathead screwdriver. Next we're going to disconnect the brake booster vacuum supply hose. We're going to remove the 5 upper plenum bolts. These are all Allen heads. And they do strip out relatively easy, so you're probably best off breaking these free by hand. And disconnect the EGR vacuum transducer, just 10mm bolts. Disconnect the mass airflow sensor wire so you can remove this air box. These clip styles actually have a plastic pin you need to push in all the way, and it'll dislodge the clip. Four clips on the airbox. Oh, it looks like we got a bit of a rodent's nest inside the airbox there. You can see we'll have to clean that out. Here I'm taking off the throttle body to try and gain access to the EGR tube, which turns out when I actually finish the job, the throttle body doesn't need to come off, nor does the EGR valve need to be unbolted. You just want to, I believe it's a 24mm wrench to break free the EGR tube. You just want to disconnect that EGR tube. Taking off the EGR vacuum transducer here, you can see the rubber piece underneath there is pretty poor condition, so you're going to want to check that, make sure it's not cracked. If so, you're just going to have to put a new piece of vacuum hose on there. I'm just taking this off to get it out of my way, give us a little more room to get in there to that EGR valve. Getting the EGR valve tube off is probably one of the harder parts of this job. There are 2 10mm bolts that hold the EGR to the side of the manifold, which you can disconnect that way and then pull the manifold off and then disconnect the EGR valve and reassemble the EGR onto the manifold on the bench, which is actually what I did in this video, because I wasn't able to get a wrench down in there to get the tube off the EGR. So now we got the intake pretty much loose, so what I'm doing now is I'm just kind of wiggling around to see what else we got connected. In the back here we have a coolant tube that comes right up behind, which is kind of a pain in the butt to get off, so I'm going to wiggle this thing around to try and give me a little more clearance to get in there. So we're going to pop that off, and then right behind there is a coolant tube that basically points directly down, which is about the same size as this tube here. That one there can be pretty tricky. I did struggle a little bit getting it off. If you're having problems, it's probably only about a 4-inch section of tubing. You can cut it if you can't get it off, and then replace it when you reassemble it. Sometimes that's a much easier method rather than trying to waste a whole bunch of time getting it off, because like I said, it's pretty tricky to get back there. Definitely not the best design by Nissan. Oh, those are actually both coolant tubes. I take that back. So they're both coolant tubes, and there's a close-up picture of them there. There's one that goes to the side and one that goes straight down. Those both have coolant runs through both of those. I'm going to pull it up. There, we got them both disconnected. There's two electrical connectors underneath here. One for the idle air control valve, I believe, and I don't remember what the other one was, but you're going to want to pull that up and just disconnect those. And they don't make it very easy to get to a lot of this stuff, so but once you get those connected, we can get this thing right up out of the way. Another thing you want to make sure you do before you get this all apart is just blow off the whole engine with some compressed air, so you don't have to worry about any dirt or debris falling down inside the intake there when you're pulling this off, which I had already done at the beginning of this video. A couple more push connectors here. Just push these pins off and they're going to pop out. Not the best design by Nissan, but they don't always work as they're supposed to. Those ones came off relatively easy. I'm disconnecting an injector, fuel injector harness right here. There's two connectors that sit right over the right valve cover. Disconnecting the fuel injectors themselves. Someone's been in here before, so a couple of the push clips were actually broke. I got those all disconnected, and I moved took the injector harness right out of the way. I'm going to put some tape over here to prevent any debris from getting inside there, and I'm going to actually clean down inside this valley on each side with some brake clean and some compressed air again before I pull this lower manifold section off. Just prevent any dirt or debris from getting down in there again. Okay, I went ahead and sped up the rest of the video here, but we're going to continue to take off this lower intake manifold. There's 4 10mm bolts holding this whole fuel rail and fuel injectors down. We're going to remove that. We're just going to set that off over to the side out of the way. The fuel rail does have to be removed to gain access to the lower intake manifold bolts. There's going to be 4 12mm nuts that hold the intake manifold on, as well as 4 Allen heads. And there's also a coolant tube that goes into the back of the lower intake manifold. And that's held on by 2 10mm bolts. So those will also have to be removed. And there it is. Okay, well, we got it all apart. We're going to take all these parts, get them washed up, get all the gasket surfaces nice and clean. I took pictures of everything so you guys could be able to figure out where all the vacuum hoses and tubes went if you needed to. Here I got all the gasket surface nice and clean. I actually put the EGR valve back on before I put the intake on, and the throttle body. Those do not need to come off. Now, I've also seen a lot of videos out there where they actually relocate this knock sensor. They get an extension harness so they can run that connector up to the top of the intake manifold. This is an option for keeping the check engine light out, but it is not the proper way to fix this. With the knock sensor located at the top of the motor like that, it will not be detecting spark knock like it should and retarding the timing. If it's an old vehicle and it's not worth putting this time or money into, then relocating the knock sensor to the top of the intake manifold may be an option for you. But if you want it done right, unfortunately, this intake manifold will have to be removed, and it will have to be put in the right position for it to work properly. Okay, the rest of the video here I'm just gonna speed up or put in lightning fast mode. The video length on this is starting to get kind of long, so you guys can watch it all happen. Once again, I just want to say thanks for watching, and if this video was helpful to you at all, hit the subscribe link in the corner of the video. Hit the like button, hit the don't like button, comment below, all that stuff will help. Thanks for watching.